it's really odd because, they give me a paradigm where, I'll see, there'll be a dot flash on the screen, and then it'll go off, and then another dot comes on. And during one of those, they can identify when they're stimulating, like my prefrontal, but I can't identify what I'm experiencing.
Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. I'm your host, Jamie Gale. Today we're joined by Galen Buckwalter, one of the most uniquely interesting people I have ever met. Galen Buckwalter is a research psychologist with over 30 years of experience exploring the intersection of psychology, technology, and human behavior. He started his career as a research professor at the University of Southern California and later developed a behavioral outcomes research program at Kaiser Permanente. But many will know him best as the mind behind the groundbreaking assessment and matching system for eHarmony.com. Now, as CEO of psyML, Galen is harnessing psychology and AI to build digital systems that support individual growth. His research has taken him to the cutting edge of neuroscience. He's a participant and scientist in the groundbreaking brain-machine interface trial aimed at restoring function after spinal cord injury, giving him unprecedented access to his own neural activity. And beyond the lab, Galen is the frontman of Siggy, a pre-punk band of psychologists that's rocked underground venues across LA. He's written over 70 songs and is now exploring ways to integrate the sounds of his own brain activity into his music. Today, we're diving into his incredible journey, the future of AI and psychology, and maybe even a little guitar talk. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Galen Buckwalter, and I hope that you do as much as I did. Galen, it's nice to see you. Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks. I'm really excited and honored to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. You're in California, in the LA area, are you not?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. Good.
Beautiful day in Southern California. So
yes. It's always about the same there, isn't it? It's kind of its thing, right? It's kind of one season with a few days of rain, which cause crisis when it rains.
There's still like 3 feet of mud in my yard from the last rain. Yeah, it was terrifying. But
did you have a mudslide?
Yeah.
Oh.
We're right below the Eaton fire. We actually had to evacuate for 6 days for that fire. Came within 2 blocks. But then when the rains came, the mud came rolling down. And mud's nothing to play with. It was terrifying. But
wow,
we survived. So yeah.
You survived. Well, I'm sorry to hear you had those troubles, but you're here to tell the tale. So
exactly.
Something to be thankful for.
Yep.
Yeah. I have family in northern British Columbia where forest fires are just kind of a part of every summer, to be honest. And I don't mean to downplay it, but I just mean that my family's been evacuated. My family have to go away and come back. And there's always the news stories stop, but in town, there's we sprayed a lot of water on those fires, and a lot of sprinklers went off, and there's all sorts of other things that happen afterwards that have to be dealt with. And major changes.
It's part of life now, it seems.
Yes.
I've heard this age referred to as the pyrocene age. So the age of fire is coming. So
age of fire is coming.
Yeah.
I see. Oh, interesting. Well, it's the I'll get in trouble for saying these things, but I did travel through Northern California for a while, and of course everyone wants to see the redwoods and the sequoias, and when you go to the museums up there or the information centers, they talk about these things and how the largest trees actually have these very small cones, and there's not a, they're not very large, which I guess, we can all be thankful they don't drop these massive cones from that high up in the air, and like the Australian bunya tree drops like a bowling ball from like 300 feet up. Like it's really like there are signs all over the place in bunya plantations that say, stay out of here from this period to this period.
You at your own risk.
Yeah. But however, one of the things I did learn is in a sequoia or redwood forest that both those species of trees actually only germinate with fire. The seed will not germinate unless it's been on fire, which tells us something about the history of that place. That if those forests are as old as we say they are, that there have been regular fires there for a very long time.
Right. And we've suppressed it for so long. But
is that what's been happening? They've been suppressed?
Yeah, a lot of, natural fires get put now to protect properties. And, so, but now, with the drying climate, can't suppress the fires, and they turn into these mega fires. Whereas, if the normal cycles would have happened, the fires would have been much smaller. If they happened during the times when they normally would have occurred, it would have been wetter. And now they're monster fires, and they blow up so quickly. That's the thing with the Eaton fire here. I mean, we had heard about it an hour or so before it, before we could see it. And but in an hour's time, it had gone from a speck to hundreds of acres, and and it was blowing, and it was, the evacuation from that was really post-apocalyptic feeling. The fire on the mountains, and howling winds, and as it turned out, I use a wheelchair, and my van of all days was in the shop, so I ended up having to just take my chair and get the hell out of Dodge, as it were. So it was quite an experience.
You left just in your motorized chair.
Yeah.
That would have felt very apocalyptic. That would have that added to all of it, I'm sure. Wow.
Yeah, smoke, and it was dark. The power was out, and I driving down the streets with people trying to get out of town quickly, and this huge fire on the hills coming down towards our house.
Wowee. That's incredible, and you live to tell the tale.
Yeah, it's a good tale. So
this may sound silly, but every once in a while I hear a tale where I'm like, I think that story's better than whatever was bad about the experience. I had dinner with a guitar player who he was playing with the band Kiss, and he had, he was at my music store years ago doing a clinic, and we went out for dinner, and he told me this story where he got shot outside of a club in Hollywood, but they weren't shooting at him. Someone way down the street was firing off a gun for whatever reason, and it it grazed his ear, and it went through the flesh of his knee, and then of course, because he plays for a famous band, it ends up all over the news, and his mom's calling, "Oh my God, you got shot!" And he's like, "Mom, I'm okay. I just got it's a flesh wound, literally." But he pulled up his pant leg and showed me the bullet wound, and I thought to myself, That's a great story, man. I might
Yeah,
take a bullet. If there's no permanent damage, I might take a bullet for the story. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the
So
stories where it's you stumble, and fall and break your leg. It's like not so impressive.
not so impressive. Yeah. 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 I knew a kid in grade 3 who did that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's interesting to me, this part of it, because uh well, what I think relates to you and your work, and correct me if I'm wrong here, um but we have people who go through the exact same experience who have very different responses to it.
no,
It's we
yeah,
have people and they have this scenario and they live through, I don't know, the Holocaust. And
yeah,
people say, well, they went through something really rough, so they give them an excuse for being a jerk, being miserable, hating on people. I hate those people.
yeah,
And then you meet other people who went through the same thing. And my wife's grandfather, her's 80, was the only one in his family who survived through the Second World War, and he was in Nazi work camps. He's a Polish Jew, and
mm,
when his son got a video camera in the late 1980s, he sat his dad down. His dad never talked about the stories, but he told the story, so he agreed. And his son asked him questions. Just tell me about this, and he'd go through these scenarios where he'd describe what had happened, which is one single experience, which many people would say could be crushing for life. And he would
yeah,
say, but they were kind to me.
hmm,
He just
yeah,
described being beaten,
yeah, right,
but he
right,
wasn't killed. And he said, but they were
yeah,
kind to me.
yeah,
And then another scenario, where he goes through this awful experience where they realized the potatoes were being stored, like 18 inches under the ground from where they were, and they clawed at it with their nails because they only ate 2 or 3 times a week during that period. And he would get up and they got caught, and he would end the sentence with, but they were kind to me.
yeah. Incredible,
And
incredible. Yeah,
nobody would blame him for hating those people,
yeah,
but he makes the
absolutely.
choice not to.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. That fascinates me, and how we develop as organisms to either you know be able to feel that level of compassion, that level of gratitude, um, that level of fellowship. Um, Yet other people are stuck in their limbic systems really, and are just reactive, and I mean can't get past their emotional, you know their primal emotions, and of fear and hate and disgust. Um and it's I really at this point I honestly think it is something we can all develop, that um those higher level, pro-social, um pro pro-organism
Mhm.
uh, actions. We can both learn what to do and how to think. Thoughts matter in this paradigm, and our awareness, just the fact that we have awareness, is just incredible. I mean, you look at the universe, and how much of that matter is able to experience it the way we are experiencing it. It's, I mean, our awareness is such a gift, and it changes our very organism. Um, I mean, it's my thinking that your relative, um, there that he got to that place because he systematically approached life um, from a place of compassion, and was able to put his emotions in a context, a broader context, um, and that's so cool. And I think we're all able to do that. It it takes a lifestyle almost, and a way of thinking, and um, but with practice we can get there. So
Mhm. Mhm. What do
and,
you use the term pro-organism a couple of times there?
yeah,
What does that mean for you? When you say that, what do you intend to convey?
um, basically, I think the survival is the ultimate pro-organism. I mean, survival, reproduction, um, you know, um, relationships, um, but being able to regulate our physiological systems is the fundamental need for a self-organizing kind of biological entity. Um, so, being able to live in a chaotic environment, um, but have a physiological system that is able to maintain homeostasis,
Mhm.
balance through chaos. Um, that's what I see as a fundamental kind of pro-organism um, activity. And if if we if we could, if we do that, um, then we can start to build on that to really get to um, higher levels, higher assumes some hierarchy, or good and bad, and I don't think
Or at
it's
least a
good.
direction. We can
Yeah,
call
yeah,
direction good if we'd like versus direction
yeah,
bad.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Positive survival, um, you know, um, self and group sustaining behaviors, and but but yeah, I mean, if we just think about regulating our systems, and we do the things that help us keep our homeostasis through chaos. I mean, we can prepare. We can have an organism that um it is in decent shape, that that we eat the right things, um we live in a way that prepares our system for the next trauma,
Mhm.
the next adversity, the next change, and with with that, I mean, that's kind of the basis. Is the physiological
Mhm.
maintenance, and but then we can start thinking about um, what we do with our awareness, to um, to go from not just surviving through chaos, but thriving.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think I mean, to do that, and I work with um, this investor philosopher, neuroscientist guy, Antonio Gracias, and he's coined the term pro-entropic.
Wait a second. Is that his actual last name? His last name is Thank You?
Antonio Gracias, that's his name.
Tony, thank you. That's great. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Antonio Gracias. Carry on.
Yeah. But yeah, he calls it pro-entropic, where we develop, so that we go beyond just being resilient, bouncing back from trauma to being able to start to control our environment to the extent that we minimize the trauma that our system experiences, because we've actively created our niche and our surroundings, as well as our awareness, our how we process, how we perceive our environment, and um, with that amount of flexibility, it's almost like we can chaos. It doesn't impact us the way it would without that level of awareness, and that kind of proactive um, niche that we build, that where the ultimate um, part of that niche is fellowship, I think, to truly have um, relationships that come from a shared meaning and purpose. Um, I mean that does magic to the system.
Yeah. Let's
Uh,
dive more into that in just a second. I want to sort of bring our listeners along for a second, for some of them who might be thinking about these things for the first time here. So when you
yeah,
say pro-entropic, you're talking about the problem with entropy, and
yeah,
that we are effectively always kind of dying from a cellular level, right? And so on a evolutionary sort of biology sort of aspect, intelligence basically starts with a cell being able to move with the sort of help of a protein in a lipid, either towards what is good for them or away from what is bad for them, right? And that's the basic, the earliest and most simplest form of intelligence that we can think of, right? And
absolutely.
then and you talked, then you referred to self-organizing organisms, because eventually, over a very long period of time, these
Yeah,
singular cell creatures sort of group together for advantage. But we still always move towards what's advantageous and away from what is harmful for us, whether we're talking about physically in obvious senses or psychologically, emotionally. But
yeah,
all of our senses also, we can say, developed over these things. We the ability to hear movement within our environment,
hmm
we call hearing, is
yeah.
because our eyes are directed in one direction. And so I'm just going to sort of lay out for you my understanding of the evolutionary biology to sort of bring us in line.
No, yeah,
So we are bilateral creatures. The first ones were sort of radial creatures, right?
mm,
And all bilaterals develop in the exact same way. Whether you're a lizard or whether you're a shark or whether you're a human, we all have two eyes and a mouth and sensors which lead things to our mouth, because we consume things and we can move forward. Not all of us can actually move backwards very well, but we move towards the things we need, right? And we have a symmetry to us. And so, in a physical sense, we're always moving, in direction good, in direction um, pro-entropic. So in order to, because we're constantly dying, we need to refuel. We need to find a mate to then pass it on, because our cells will only last for so long, and our solution to that is
Mhm.
by procreating. Correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So here we are up the evolutionary scale from a single cell, moving towards what we need, away from what we don't need. And this is the basic fundamental truth of the world. Even in economics, we can, Adam Smith's observation, you can reliably count on people to take care of their own interests rather than to hope for their benevolence, is
Right.
basically moving towards what we need and
Yeah.
not towards what you think you want. Basically, we still take care of ourselves just simply to deal with entropy, to deal with the fact that if we don't attend to the day and aim at the highest good, we're going to die. It's that
Yep.
simple. It's not more complicated than that.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so
Right.
now, now you talked about the need for a common narrative. So now I'm trying to establish that common narrative.
Yeah.
Most of our listeners are somehow connected to the guitar, and so of course they're intelligent and people who are interested in all sorts of different things. But I wanted to establish a narrative for all of us to carry on with this conversation,
Yeah.
and so the next part of that became social structures
Yeah.
that to advantage. And you mentioned already sort of a mutual reciprocity, right? The
Right.
the idea is, if you're a good hunter and you make the kill, if you share your meat with someone else and they're a good hunter on a day where you don't make the kill, they
Mhm.
might then share their meat with you. And so we store future benefits in each other's bellies, if you will. Is that a
Right.
fair way to look at it?
Yeah. And
Okay.
um, I mean, you also share, with someone that like
Isn't a good hunter.
is good at, keeping the campfire going.
Yes, we're
Uh,
setting up
yeah.
the tent really fast. You know? Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
And that's personality right there. That's
Yes.
develop. I mean, we need diversity. Um, that and I think that group survival is the fundamental argument for diversity, and why a diverse genome survives, better than homogeneous
Mhm.
uh, genome. That's another tangent, but I love personality. Um,
Yes.
so
So,
sort of that.
well, and let's talk more about that, because what
Mm,
I think what we want to fundamentally set up is that our psychology, our personal interactions really still are very much fundamentally driven by the fact that we need to survive and eat, and procreate, and that
yeah.
we, a lot of people think we've evolved beyond our sort of animal nature, and that's just foolishness in my opinion. I don't know if you think
Oh,
how you feel about that, but
I I mean, we're still fundamentally self-organizing biological entities.
yeah.
Always have been, always will be. Um,
Okay.
Although, well, maybe with you know,
Well, all right, and we'll get into
digit,
that.
we can get to that.
We'll get into that also. But what I wanted to do is listen. We read your bio at the beginning of this. The bio you provided, and so if you're listening to the intro, you know about your connection to eHarmony. We know about your punk rock band. We know about some of your current work. But I would love to also just hear it in your words. So for our listeners, what is the essence of your work and what drives you?
Um, the essence of my work, I think, is um, understanding systems. I mean, I love natural systems. I love the uh, just watching, the life and death. I grew up on a farm, and I think that very early put me in touch with the cycles of life and death, which was as impactful a part of my of the early experience of living on a farm.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think my life has um, been greatly impacted by my disability. As when I was 17, a couple days before I turned 17, I broke my neck um, diving into a river. Um, and I that is not, you know, what was on the agenda for
Wasn't
that
tension
day.
when you dove?
Yeah,
No. Yeah.
of living a life as a quadriplegic.
Mhm.
Um, but the fact that that happened, um, and all the experiences that that has brought, which, um, I mean, most of my life is the same. I'm Joe Average. My fundamental needs and desires and dreams are the same as they would have been if I didn't um, break my neck. But um, I have and continue to experience things that challenge. Yeah, I mean, just the time that it takes um, to be a gimp. Pardon my vernacular, but I mean, there's no good word that I've found for disability. It's like, oh, I'm not.
We don't hear that word very much anymore. Used to hear it
Yeah,
earlier and referred to a particular leg. If you had a short leg or something, so a gimp leg or something. But
yeah,
what's the
right.
origin of that word? Do you know?
That's a great question. I don't know, but that's
Okay.
kind of where I've settled.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a gimp. I just some things are gimpy, um,
Mm-hmm.
but but with that experience, I mean, dealing with pain, um, it, dealing with physical issues that can be life threatening and have been life threatening for me um, at, across my life um, has just I mean experientially um, made the issues of life um, whether you yeah, I mean whether even whether I really want to live, I think made me grapple with those issues um, in in not a conceptual way, but you
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, and you know, the that learning how um, to live with you know fucking balls um,
Mm-hmm.
with that um, has kind of driven my personal journey. Because I I mean, life without meaning, life without um, expression and creativity, um, it is not life. And there have been times where I wondered, if just physically, if I could, if I was able to achieve that um, level of engagement. Um, and I've always maintained that if I can, I have the right to end my life. And which takes us into another potential discussion. But for me, having that kind of ace in the hole almost, that
Mm-hmm.
you know I it is liberating, or has been liberating.
Mm-hmm.
I'm realizing that I have that right. I have that ability. If
Puts you in
if
control. It takes you
exactly,
from being helpless victim to
exactly,
conscious activator. Yeah, yeah,
exactly, and
yeah.
I choose to live,
Mm-hmm.
um, and by choosing to live, um, that's a certain degree of agency right there. Uh, and then, what can I do? Um, even knowing that, okay, yeah, I have certain, weirdnesses about my physiology that may, cause me to stroke out tomorrow. Um, and but it's kind of like, well, fuck that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, life's life's hard in a big city, and that's really not. I mean, that we all face that, whether we
Yep.
realize it or not. It's just a little more obvious for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think trying to formalize that experience and 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 take the good, because I do think at this point in my life, um, I do think I kind of kick ass.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I feel good about what I you know,
Yeah.
I'm so fortunate. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm doing what I love to do, um, and how many people can say that? Um, and I've kind of created my niche, and and um, and I think, at this point, particularly like working with Antonio, it's like, trying to, um, you know, take some of that experience um, and share it, formalize it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, what are what's the essence of the process that I've gone through to, become pro-entropic,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how can I you know kind of convey that to other people, um, and yeah, um,
I think
it's
it's really interesting that you identify that you had to deal with death and that you had to sort of wrestle with your mortality and take control of it to a certain extent. There's
yeah,
a let's see if I can follow my own line of thought here for a second. I recently read something on LinkedIn, I think, where someone had asked maybe ChatGPT or one of the large language models, about sort of advice for humanity and how to work with AI and such. And it gave a lot of, well, what it revealed first. Personally, what it revealed to me is the political bent of this particular large language model, and it
mhm,
seemed very nice. It talked about humanity's strengths and such, but it also talked about our proclivity for war and that we're going to have to learn how to get along and being self-destructive and all this. And of course, people got on and talked about how we're how we can't learn to get along and how we're always fighting and such. And I am absolutely not pro-war. I don't choose to fight. I'm not a fighter. I like to take care of people. I like to care for people. I'm a lover, not a fighter. One might say. I'm a fighter when I have to survive. Don't get me wrong.
yeah,
I do things.
yeah,
But I think that we're in this strange point in our society where we're so far off the farm, like you, we're so far off the farm that we no longer can reconcile ourselves to the fact that we're killers.
Yeah.
And that maybe this long form of evolution, which almost everybody would agree with, this, from the same perspective, who would say we need to stop fighting, we need to get along, we take care of the planet, all of this stuff. Great. I agree. But I don't think it's an overnight solution. And frankly, I think we are moving towards direction good. I think that we've moved from small tribal societies and from warlords and landowners, and that overall we're living with really large areas of peace and prosperity throughout the globe, to a level that has never happened before. And we continue to move in the right direction. But I don't think we can do it without the blood and the violence. I wish we could. I wish we could snap our fingers and just arrive,
Yeah.
I think that's naive. And I think there is a natural evolution that moves towards these things. And so I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that, about our reality as killers. Hang on, I'm going to add one other layer to this. And people are going to think I'm a hater here, because I'm really not a hater here. But I just see an incredible rise in like veganism amongst our young people, and and almost everyone I speak to about that, they say, well, we don't need to be causing the pain or the destruction of some sort. And to me, it's just a real big disconnect from their humanity. That we don't expect the dogs in our house. We recognize the cat leaves and kills a bird and eats a bird, and the cat's not evil for it. You come in, they stroke it, they put their pictures on Instagram. It's a part of the natural cycle. And so I'll end right there. Sort of just us with death, with mortality, and the reality that we're not plants. We don't gather sunshine through photosynthesis. we're killers. What do you have to say to that, Galen?
I mean, that's how we've evolved, and I mean that you're right. That's not going to that's us. The how we choose to express that is where we need to make individual decisions, and I don't think there's any right answer there. I grew up, the farm that I grew up with was in a Mennonite community, and it was entirely pacifist, and nonviolent, to the extent that like my father, who I just respect implicitly, was a truly nonviolent person, and to the extent that I don't think he would have physically harmed anyone, even if someone was harming him or harming someone that he loved. I think his response would have been to care for who was getting harmed. And I mean, there's something that seems very naive about that. But it's not where I'm at. It's not where I've landed. But it's impacted me immensely. That what would the world look like if the bulk of individuals were pacifist. And, if, a war broke out and millions of people showed up to just be there, and were willing um, to be killed, to stop the violence. I mean, is that a possibility? Yeah, it's a possibility. Is it going to happen? Not in our lifetime, but there's still some aspirational, component to how I view that. That it's, yeah, we're not there, and we do. I think there are bad dudes out there that are going to fight, and we are probably in the immediate term, we have to fight them, um, or the consequences are are not going to be tolerable. So I think, yeah, that's where we're at, but we can still aspire to a level of or a society, um, um, kind of, and kind of individual
Yeah.
reactivity that's different.
But that's exactly it. I mean, that is I'm certainly not advocating
Yeah.
for going
Oh,
around killing people or the violence. I
and
just mean to recognize that actually we are in process because
yeah,
society, even just the concept of society, is an agreed upon narrative in which we
yeah,
all agree to a common story that these are the things that are important to us. These are the
yeah,
things worth preserving. These are the things worth putting resources into to make sure that they don't go away, to make sure they're there for us. And overall, our society, certainly the Western society that I'm familiar with, I've traveled much of the Western world anyways, is remarkably violence free. Remarkably.
yeah,
you know
yeah,
and we're on that journey, and I don't think we're
yep.
becoming more and more violent. I don't think, as a matter of fact, my a thing happened to my son a year or two ago where he was walking home late at night, and there was a drunk guy angry on his cell phone, and my son walked past him close enough that the guy sucker punched him. He's okay. My son's all right. But it occurred to me that my son is, at this point in time, in his early to mid 20s,
Mhm.
and didn't yet have the life experience to know to stay away from this angry drunk guy, which I learned much earlier than that.
Yeah,
You,
yeah,
you know, but he didn't actually I realized I sent my kids to a Waldorf school,
mhm.
which is on the sort of very extreme of the sort of peaceful get along. When
Right,
bad things happen in high school, the parents were brought in and we had a restorative circle with the kids. Like we got together. The kids who had a problem would talk with the parents, with the one of the teachers, but my son had actually never seen a schoolyard fight. He had never been around when everyone gathered together and the sort of the roar of the Coliseum came to
yeah,
the schoolyard as the
yeah,
bloodthirst comes that they want to see two people rip each other apart,
right,
and
right.
I thought, wow, that's amazing that he got to
It
that
really
age
is.
without ever seeing that. And I
Yeah,
think society wise that we actually are more and more towards that direction. But when I talked about killers, though, I mostly meant about, that we're carnivores, that we eat, and that that part of it, and that's part of the
Yeah.
natural cycle of things. But we're so far removed from even the schoolyard violence and such that we anamorphize almost everything. That's also probably thanks to Disney. Every animal now has a smile and a character and a voice, and sings and dances.
Right. And
you know,
identifies their emotions.
yeah. And so, um, anyways, that's the common narrative in the social order, and that I think that's part of the grand evolution and scheme of things. Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com. Are you serious about the business of guitar? Then you need to join us on Patreon. We're building a future where guitar makers are able to live prosperous lives making instruments that inspire the musical experience, which helps to create a more beautiful world. Where others who are passionate about the guitar can thrive, those who help in the promotion and resale, trade shows, writing of books and articles are supported as a valuable part of the community. A community where we explore with curiosity and encourage those around us in their endeavors. With a community effort, we can accomplish far more than we can individually. So let's be serious about your guitar business and join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Jamie Gale Music. We are better together, so let's do this together. I love where we've been, and I'm excited about where we're going. And so you've done a lot of work in trying to understand the social order and what the motivation is and such. One of the most notable works that you would do that would be common to the people would know about is the work that you did with eHarmony, right? And so I believe, if I'm correct, you wrote the algorithm or the system that sort of brought people together.
Right.
Galen, that's a remarkably successful venture. I believe I listened to one of your other interviews, and the divorce rate is remarkably low, down to like 4% if you met on eHarmony versus 8 or 11% on some of the competitors. And
Right.
so, what was that process like? I mean, how did you? Well, first of all, why you? Why did they choose you? How did that happen?
Yeah.
And then, what was the process you went through, and what sort of little pearls of wisdom can you share with us that you learned about humanity and how we get along?
Mhm.
That is now, I mean, I don't know how many people have met through eHarmony, but you have to have a lot of data. I don't know if you still have any involvement with them, but
Yeah.
there's a huge track record.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Um, yeah. I mean, the way it came about, the the guy that started eHarmony, Neil Clark Warren, uh, was actually a professor of mine in grad school. Uh, and he, after grad school, I went on to do research at USC. Um, I was a research professor there, and he had moved on to clinical work, primarily working with couples. And he came to the conclusion that that there was a substantial percentage of couples that he saw that there was nothing he could do as a therapist to help their marriage, be a good marriage, because he thought they were fundamentally mismatched.
The die
Um,
had been cast.
exactly that
Okay.
it was oil and water. It was
Mhm.
just not a good match. These people were not made to live together. Uh, so his question to me as a researcher was, is there any way we can get ahead of the curve and help people, um, at the very least, I stay away from the mismatch, not get into a relationship that they're going to find, 4 years down the road that, what was, a cute little quirk about that person just drives them freaking nuts. So what we ended up doing and the design that I kind of helped them with, and we did research for like 3 years before um, anything was launched, um, but what we did was look at married couples and looked at all the factors that I could think of that um, might influence, the relationship. So, their personality, their values, their interests, um, and put together and validated a questionnaire around that, and then um, gave that to married couples along with a marital satisfaction questionnaire. So we built the model then to match people from that data. And, we were optimizing for marital satisfaction. Um, so then, we applied that same model to single couples, with making the assumption that, if that what we saw in marriage could be applied to singles. Um, and if we only presented matches to the people that met a certain criteria uh, for being a successful, long-term, satisfied relationship. Um, so that was the basis for it. And yeah, I mean, it was like any start. I mean, the first 3 years or so, we were barely making it, um, and then, but then, I mean, it was the right time and right place, and a lot of things worked for us. I think, at that point, we launched in 2000. Um, so that was when dating sites were really kind of, I mean, you walked through a dating site, you'd want to, change your shoes after you. It was a little seamy.
Okay, yeah.
And,
Kind of
and
5 years into the popularization of the internet at this point in time, right?
the,
95 to
yeah,
2000. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And so women particularly were not comfortable
Mm-hmm.
in, dating sites. I mean, who wants to open their inbox and, have somebody's junk
Mm-hmm.
staring at them, which was, literally was the level of interchange. I mean, there wasn't a lot of, filters, a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
um, so we come along. We initially we have a huge questionnaire. I mean, I was like holding to the staunch psychometrics that we need this to be valid, and so it was like almost a 400 item questionnaire to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think in a strange way that barrier to entry ended up being helpful to us because I mean, if you were going to sit through a 400 item questionnaire, that in and of itself filtered out people that weren't really fairly serious about about the process. Um, and, so I think that, along with the fact that, the model, um, as we got more people into it, it really did start producing um, matches that were more compatible. I mean, there are certain um, traits that where I mean, overall, um, similarity is positive in long-term relationships. I
Mhm.
mean, not that you want your clone, um, but I mean, you don't. I mean, if you have someone who's highly conscientious and organized, I mean, they're probably not going to be a good fit with somebody who's, totally laid back and like, hey, what's the problem?
Yeah.
Um, and just some common sense um, similarities went a long way, or at least avoiding, putting people together that were
Hey,
greatly different.
those are some of the things you might expect. But
Exactly.
what were there any surprises for you where
Um,
you realized that was actually causal, and you're like, "Wow, that I didn't see that coming."
yeah, I, I mean the degree of similarity was surprising to
Hmm.
me. That really, uh, you know, that similarity is a good thing. It was also surprising to me um, how I don't know how to put this without, but I mean, there was kind of the almost the alpha woman um, that can make a you know can fit with a wider range of men. Um, they're women can really drive the success of a relationship,
Hmm.
um, and that was again, once you see it, it's like, yeah, I mean, that's right. That that there's a um, certain way of being, that women, a lot of women have that is more pro relationship, and
Yeah,
as
it's very
long as they're with someone that's
more agreeable.
basically respectful.
Hmm.
There it's going to work. So that, I mean, there was a little bit more, um, kind of a wider margin of error um, for women.
That's
Um,
very common within the circles of guitar makers and artists.
mm,
So the Sharon Osbourne, the Sharon to Ozzy, it's very normal to
oh,
have a highly functional, assertive, high executive function
yeah,
female
yeah,
who sees great promise in the lovely artisan artist,
mm,
who maybe
mm,
doesn't have such high executive function and
yeah,
such. They come
yeah,
together and she really drives the direction in many ways. And we see it all the time, actually, with guitar makers. I see it with musicians as well.
wow,
That's a, yeah.
that's fascinating. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. And
So, yeah, I mean, most, it was all good old common sense that,
Yeah, we
you
don't talk about it.
like,
But when you talk about it, I'm starting to think of all sorts of people. I won't name anybody here on the show. I mean,
yeah,
there's we all know, and even we tip our hat towards it sometimes. My wife is at we've been married a long time. We have a lovely family, and you know, I hear the guitar makers at the shows, at the boutique guitar showcase, the NAM show where we met, saying, oh, we know Roberta actually runs the show.
yeah, yeah. The power behind the throne.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's this great spot. I don't know if you saw the film My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It's a
Yeah,
funny, yeah, and they're a very traditional Greek family, and the daughter's like, Dad's never gonna let me do this. He's the head of the family, and the mother says, yes, but you know what the woman is? She's the neck, and she can turn the head any way she wants.
yeah, yeah. It all goes back to evolution again.
What we need, what we don't need.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
We're,
So,
how
no,
we're going to survive.
yeah, I have a wonderful partnership with my wife, but we work very closely together. Sometimes I wonder how people hold it all together if they have two completely different jobs, two different functions, thinking in different ways, going to different places all the time.
Yeah,
We're almost inseparable. We're
yeah,
doing everything together.
yeah.
And
It,
yeah.
my my wife and I had been, worked separate careers entirely until COVID, pretty much, and then we, for the first time ever, we were in the house together 24/7, and it was a very new experience, and it worked. It worked wonderfully for us, and now it's kind of like we've changed our careers around, so we both can kind of work from home and be together, and you know go go out and do our errands together, and
Yeah, yeah,
it yeah, it's worked really well. So
yeah. It it's a lovely full life when you have a close partner, for
now,
sure.
yeah, yeah, it's
So
it's changes
yeah.
changes who we are. Yeah,
Hmm,
right.
hmm. So you have this. You refer to yourself as a average Joe, but you
Hmm.
you grew up in a Mennonite community on a farm. 17 years old. You do a very typical childhood kind of thing to do, although you're a young man at 17, at that point in time. But you dive off into a river. You hit your head on presumably a rock or something of the sort.
Yeah.
It broke your neck, and now you're in a different position, a different way. And you know, my niece is in a wheelchair all the time. Also, she had brain cancer when she was 7 years old.
Mm,
Um, and she was a normal 7-year-old child up until that point. And
mm,
then she had brain cancer and some infections related to the surgery and such. And since then, you know, she also has limited mobility and such.
mhm,
Um, and her verbal skills were initially cut off completely. And now she speaks. She still has, partial paralysis in her face, so she doesn't speak uninhibited, but she speaks, very clearly to people once you get used to understanding the way of it. And there was a point where she couldn't speak, where it was maybe her father said it, that she's 100%, her brain is, her thoughts are there, her intellect is there,
mm.
but she's trapped inside the body
Yeah,
currently. Can't
yeah,
communicate it. She can't move
yeah.
in that way. The Metallica song "One" was about a soldier, Johnny, who came back from the First World War as a paraplegic, but also unable. I can't speak. I cannot live. I cannot die. He's
Yeah.
absolutely trapped inside his body. And so Um, obviously you can speak, you're highly verbal, but there's this, how much do you think that physical alteration in your life
Mm,
drove your intellectual pursuits?
mm.
Do you think that you would be a researcher? Do you think that you would be driving intellectually? Or do you think that's a part of the sort of natural filter that happened because you didn't have as many options open to you because of the physical limitations, that,
Yeah,
you become the thoughts more?
yeah,
And uh, how
yeah.
much how much do you think that has to do with it? Or do you think you would have likely ended up here anyways because that's just the way your brain works and you would
I I find it hard to believe I would have ended up here,
have? Hmm.
um, because I was very athletic. I was a runner. I was a good runner. Um, I wanted to pursue um, pursue that. Um, I mean, I was. I mean, my physical um, self was how I identified.
Mm.
Prior to my accident. Much more so. I mean, I was a bright enough kid, but I didn't really like school, or didn't.
Hmm.
I had a strict policy against doing homework,
Hmm.
and so yeah, I think I think, but yeah, I mean, it's hard. How do we look back? Any of us look back and think about, what if I had done this versus that, and where would I be now?
Hmm.
Uh, but I do think that that not having full physical functioning, and particularly, I mean, for a long time, I was fiercely independent, and even though it would, I mean, it added in um, a couple of hours to my day. I, you know, totally took care of, my physical needs,
Hmm.
dressing and bowel and bladder, which are, I mean, when everything, for walkies, that's not really something that, is top of mind. I mean, that takes you, like 15 minutes a day or something.
Right,
But
right.
I mean, being disabled, that's a significant chunk of your day.
Hmm.
Uh, but I mean, I would just add in a couple hours to, do everything. I was in I used a manual chair. Um, you drove a regular car, which meant I schlepped my chair in and out of the car,
Hmm. Hmm.
10 times a day. Um, and, but then, I get a few years of doing that, and the body just starts going to crap.
Hmm.
I blew my shoulders out, um,
Right.
and I had to shift to a power chair. And so, as a kid, it was like, oh, if I'm not independent, if I can't be independent, that's going to be my my line in the sand. It's like,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, but when I got to that point, it's like, ah, I mean, so I have someone to help me. Um, it turned out, at that point, I mean, there was enough driving me, or, and I found enough satisfaction and purpose in intellectual pursuits, and and I mean physical engagements that I could enjoy, primarily music, uh, and the creation of music. Um, I think that really gave me, and continues to give me, a sense of physical, you know, satisfaction, and feeling of accomplishment, even, you know, as I'm increasingly, finding that I can't, do all the, or, I mean, if I tried to do everything myself, it would be like all I did, um, all day. Um, so yeah, I think the physical loss definitely, you know, shifted my focus, and but as I've gotten into it, it's like, I mean, yeah, this is I love doing
Mhm.
what I do. I love having a day to, just dive into new research, and um and
Was it
just
psychometrics right from the beginning, or what's
um,
the path to psychometrics?
well, it was it was statistics in general, I think,
Hmm.
that really kind of changed. I mean, that felt like my soil, I mean, we- just as, my father, found his satisfaction in literally um, in farming, and I think for me, having the tools to make sense out of, and to find patterns and cycles in massive amounts of data, um, just appealed to me so much. It was discovery. It was, you know, understanding, previous research, and how the new findings, relate to that, and do they confirm? Do they, you know, that just I just loved that, and psychometrics is another tool in that arsenal, of being able to quantify latent traits. Um, I think, it as we get into AI, I think psychometrics is going to change like everything. I mean, we're going to be in a position, increasingly, to not need to measure latent traits, but to actually start to understand the physiological and the neurological correlates um, to our behaviors, to our thoughts, to our motivations. Um, you know, I mean, that's happening more quickly than we could have imagined, I think, and I
Hmm.
think, this
Well,
it,
let's address that. So first
yeah,
of all, many of our people listen as opposed to watch because they're
uh,
working, and they listen while they're driving or making a guitar.
um,
Frankly,
uh,
is a big part of our audience. And
yeah,
so you've referenced a few times,
yeah,
and for those who want to watch, you can watch this on YouTube for sure. But Galen, you've referenced a couple of times now. You point towards your head. You
yeah,
have what appear to be some mechanical caps sort of sticking up from
Yeah.
the top of your shaved head, like you know, a very the nicest, cleanest looking Mad Max character you've ever seen. You don't look psychopathic or post-apocalyptic in
No.
any way, but nonetheless, you have some machinery kind of sticking out of your head. Can you explain that for those who are listening right now, please, and tell us what's happening there?
Yeah. I in January of 24 um, was implanted with 6 Utah arrays. Um, a, a Utah array is basically a chip with 67 electrodes on each of them. Um, and so I have 6 of those implanted into various areas of my left cortex. Um, there 3 of them are in sensory and motor, and the other 3 are um, 2 of them are more kind of in parietal areas, kind of association um, areas of the brain. And then one, for the first time in human history, is implanted in the prefrontal cortex. So the the it's the first time that the FDA had ever given permission
Hmm.
for an implant to be put into the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the seat of our higher levels of reasoning and executive functioning.
Mhm.
Um, so the there are 6 arrays. Each 2 of the arrays are cabled together, and there are 3 what are called pedestals that sit on the top of my head, um, kind of in a what I call a cyber hawk.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, 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 definitely. All in a line at the center of your
yeah,
head. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and so these pedestals, the top of them, screws off, and there's connectors that can be put on that um, go into a computer, and the the arrays are such that they're implanted directly beside neurons. So they're able to measure the activity of single neurons. Some of them, the one, I mean, it's kind of luck, because the surgeon they place the arrays 1.5 millimeters into the cortex. It's kind of popped in,
Hmm.
uh, and so some of the electrodes, snug right up against, you know, neurons.
Hmm.
Uh, Others may be, a bit further, from any individual neuron, but are still able to pick up more kind of, um, you know, group activity from, what's going on with neurons in that area. But it, the the when everything's hooked up, um, there's 380 some channels that are able to be recorded.
Hmm.
So I sit in front of a the screen and see, all these channels. Um, and, I can, like, if I, touch my arm, um, a certain array will light up. Uh,
Mhm.
if I count backwards by seven from 100, other arrays will light up. Um, you know, if I whistle, um, other other arrays will light up. If I listen to music, um, it's basically, I mean, the goal of this is to um, ultimately, hack the spinal cord. Um, they're this is done in conjunction with Caltech and the University of Southern California, but they want to understand um, motor activity well enough to be able to, take signals from the brain and basically, get them back into the spinal cord, um, you know, so that the break in the spinal cord can kind of be hacked. Uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Build a bridge over it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Um, so like when I'm hooked up, um, they have like digital a digital arm and fingers, and I'm able to move that hand and those fingers when I can't move my I can move my hand, but I can't move my fingers at all.
Mhm.
Uh, but yet my brain retains the ability
Mhm.
to move individual digits.
Mhm.
And, um, this is like 50 plus years after my spinal cord injury, which in and of itself was new information because they had never implanted. Most of the people that get implanted are fairly recent, um, injuries.
Mhm.
Maybe five at the long side, 10 years post injury. And along comes this old, 68-year-old dude and said, "Hey, let's do this." And so, the fact that my brain is still organized such that, individual that I can think about moving my pinky, and my pinky moves. If that signal is decoded, um, into a computer,
Mhm.
um, and so that they also, I mean, this is the arrays are both. They're not only read, but they're also write. So they can stimulate each channel as well. They put small amounts of current to activate the neurons that are beside those electrodes.
And you potentially experience it.
And I do experience it. Yeah. So I get sensations, in my hands, in my fingers,
Mhm.
uh, when they stimulate, my sensory cortex.
What is it? You get stimulation in your fingers, but you can't control your fingers. So do you normally have stimulus in your fingers? Can you feel if something?
I can feel in most of my fingers. My pinky on both hands kind of gets numb.
Mhm.
Uh, but interestingly, when they stimulate, I do get sensation in my pinky,
That's
and
different than you would experience otherwise.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, and it's interesting because with the virtual hand, when like if I move it in the way, like they put up, there's two dots on the screen, and I'm supposed to move like my index finger and my thumb to be on top of those two dots. And they when I do that, they stimulate my brain. So I get sensation of of touch, um, and it's really interesting because the touch, it takes a while for my brain to figure out what this new input is all about.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so it seems there's a certain amount of malleability in my brain. Like, um, you know, if they pair the stimulation with a visual cue, um, like if they put a light on a area of my index finger, and then give a stimuli that I normally felt like in a different area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it seems that that sensation will gravitate towards the visual cue
Mm-hmm.
over time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it's like, there are certain aspects of the brain that are very malleable. And, I also, like I had mentioned that a couple of the arrays are not in sensory or motor, but they're in more high level areas. So they stimulate those as well, like the prefrontal, and it's really odd because they give me a paradigm where I'll see there'll be a dot flash on the screen, and then it'll go off, and then another dot comes on, and during one of those they stimulate, and my task is to say which one I thought they stimulated during.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm 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 can identify when they're stimulating, like my prefrontal,
Mm-hmm.
but I I don't I can't identify what I'm experiencing, but yet
You know,
I'm
there's change. You're altered somehow.
yeah, somehow
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I sense that there's something going on, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know yet what it is. Um, and I guess from primate work that's very common. It takes us a while to um, you know understand the experience of what that area of the brain is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I mean that's just fascinating stuff to me.
Yes, I was recently listening to another neuroscientist on a different podcast who was talking about the retraining for people who have hearing impairments,
Mm,
and that as opposed to a hearing aid in the traditional sense, that they were actually given a wristband, and that wristband has a
mm,
haptic response,
mhm,
and you can be trained to hear
mhm.
through your wrist. It's
Yep,
a
yep,
fascinating,
yep,
and,
yep,
and that's that sort of malleability that you're sort of talking about there, is that we can we can make stimulations and then possibly alter where that is. And I've heard of
Mhm.
people having half their brain was damaged or removed in some way, and we would make the assumption that all of your right brain functions, are gone. You're left with only left brain functions, and everything just kind of migrates over to the other side. Is
Yeah.
from what I've heard, anyways, and that's there's so much yet to learn.
It's it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, right. We don't know. We
Hmm.
don't know a fraction of what we will in a couple of years.
Yeah. Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com. Are you serious about the business of guitar? Then you need to join us on Patreon. We're building a future where guitar makers are able to live prosperous lives making instruments that inspire the musical experience, which helps to create a more beautiful world. Where others who are passionate about the guitar can thrive, those who help in the promotion and resale, trade shows, writing of books and articles are supported as a valuable part of the community. A community where we explore with curiosity and encourage those around us in their endeavors. With a community effort, we can accomplish far more than we can individually. So let's be serious about your guitar business and join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Jamie Gale Music. We are better together, so let's do this together. I love where we've been, and I'm excited about where we're going. So let's take that AI side for a second here, because as we're learning the information, and you could stop me if you'd like, but
Mhm.
uh, from what I recall, there was some conversation during our panel discussion that your neurosynapses are firing in a rhythmic and even in a tonal way. At least the computer implies a
Yeah,
tone. I'm not sure whether it's from your brain or whether it's related to the firing rate or anything of the sort, but the result is you're seeing a physical and an audible response from the computer,
right,
um, and that you were inspired by that and thought you could use it for your own artistic expression.
right.
And then we ran into a conversation of they're your thoughts, but it's not your data.
Yep.
Yeah. And can you, I don't know how much I can lead on that, because it's, I
Yeah.
believe there's current legal uh,
Yeah.
implications about it, right? So you can say, let's not talk about it, or you can tell me what you can talk about it.
I'd love to talk about it, but
Mhm.
because I think it's an area of law that hasn't been um, codified yet. Basically, I mean, there are some um, laws around recording um, from external devices, like and what companies that are um, you doing, EEG for relaxation and things like that, what they can do with that data. Um, but when it comes to, um, actually neuronal recording, which to me is qualitatively different than um, recording from on top of the scalp, because I mean the scalp is a big barrier, but in when you have a internal device, I mean that's your neuronal firing is you,
Mhm.
in essence.
Mhm.
But the in the research, um, world doesn't see that as in in such a way, and they see that as data that because they're collecting it, that's theirs. Um, and as you alluded to, I wanted to um, use my own the sounds of my neurons firing in a song, and and I think it's good science too. I mean, how much if I'm hearing the my neurons, um, I mean, there's already so much work on neurofeedback, where people control the aspects of their brain functioning um, by getting feedback on um, very gross kind of functioning, different brain wave states. Uh, but what if, I were to, be able to try to activate individual neurons? Because, I know from the visual, um, you know, um, recording, that they provide, the visualization that I can predictably activate individual neurons, by moving in certain ways, by um, articulating in certain ways. Um, so, what if that I were able to hear those different neurons? Uh, could I, um, particularly in the context of performing music and um, performing with a band, would that alter the specific individual neurons that are firing, and would I be able to incorporate that in an artistically interesting way into the music that I'm producing? Because it's very it's different. Obviously, it's different um, sounds than if I sing. Um, but could I learn to sing and activate, specific neurons at the same time? And, it would kind of be a, an additional instrument almost. Um, can neurons sing? You know, uh, can you play the neurons? Um, so yeah, that's something that I'm going to find some way to do. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Well, very interesting. And I've got some other thoughts going on there, but maybe we'll talk about that after the show. Um, Galen, as we're coming to a close here, is there something when you accepted this interview uh, guest invite that you were hoping that we were going to discuss? That if I were a better interviewer, I would have asked you
Mm.
a particular topic or question.
Well, I mean, I find your take on things fascinating. I mean, you're such an erudite person that um, and yeah, I would have loved um, talked about the evolution of music a bit more. I think just for my own edification.
Sure.
But that, that would be a hour-long conversation.
No, but you know what? I can actually, let me oblige for a second in a
Cool.
way, because, I asked you how you came to, being
Yeah.
a doctor of psychometrics, right? And we got a bit of how that journey sort of happened, right? Um, like yourself, I was not on a path towards academia when I was young. I was not very interested in school. I moved a lot. So I'd moved 20 times by the time I was 20 years old. And I've been to a lot of different schools, often 2 schools within 1 year in elementary schools. And I went to 4 different high schools. And so, maybe that had something to do with it, but also, many artists, creative types, the thing that defines that we're creative is that we constantly step outside of the norm, which means that in a schooling environment, it's really hard to judge us and test us because we're constantly stepping outside of the testing criteria. Like you said yourself, you had a strictly no homework sort of policy, right? And I would be the same kind of thing, and I probably came across as obstinate as a teenager, but nonetheless, I was not particularly academic, let's say. Okay. And actually my pathway into a lot of these things really is the guitar. And it came from my work within unique world-class instruments. I was drawn to instruments that other people weren't making, that were doing something unique and interesting. That often those artisans had a very interesting conceptual idea, a way of thinking and arriving, perhaps in an industrial design way, sometimes a philosophical way, and this began, of course, to have many conversations that were more intellectual and academic outside of the theological context, because I was a rather zealous young Christian as a teenager. And that was also part of the evolution of sort of my movement into intellectual debate and such, was on a religious context. I didn't grow up in a religious family. And so anyways, but really the thing I wanted to connect back with you with is because you talked about cycles and movements. And so where I arrived to first start to think really about different concepts was me trying to understand why some people were drawn to a particular type of guitar and why others were not. And from my own experience, I went through the period of, I was drawn to guitar because of the hard rock, heavy metal guitar players of the late 1970s, early 1980s, when guitar was all over MTV and it was the primary thing, and guitar solos were something you saw in commercials, and that's what really drew me into it. And I was seeking perfection. Like many of those heavy metal players, you want to play faster, better, more. You want to sing higher. You want to hit more notes in there. I mean, guys were pulling up power drills with guitar picks on them to play faster, and you're really in a pursuit of perfection. But in around 1991 or the early 1990s, we had a hard rejection of this, where all of that became kind of unrelatable, inhuman. And bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden came out, and they were almost anti-performative to a certain extent. Some of these guys would just hang off their microphone for the whole show, whereas I was used to guys running around in Iron Maiden and jumping and doing splits and fireworks and everything else, right? And I was like, and they didn't care about singing in tune necessarily. Their guitar solos were, I thought at the time, really bad, because they weren't technically proficient. And I tried to understand what this was. It seemed like a hardcore rejection for me. We're going for perfection, and then there was the rejection of it. And then I began to sort of think about the different patterns of all of this. And honestly, we do events around the world. So we typically do about 25 cities over 12 countries and 3 continents every year. And really? I spent a lot of time behind a wheel, driving and thinking. And so as I'm organizing my thoughts and how all of this works, I noticed that I thought we moved from these periods of perfection seeking, and then we rejected it and moved towards what I now call golden years, or the Make America Great Again impulse, to return to our glory days, but then we actually cycle back also. And at first I thought it was this sort of infinity sort of cycling. But the thing is, I eventually changed the shape, and now I see it more as a funnel. And I see these tangential ideas at first, and that we have this tendency to sort of move towards perfection or more organic historical relevance. In a political context, this is the conservative and the liberal function, right? The liberals want to go to new places, throw away the old stuff. We're evolving. And the conservative function is to say, hey, there's a baby in that bathwater, and we care about the baby. So let's not throw out the baby, and so we end up sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and we synthesize. And so in guitars, I would see the synthesis of this. We'd have the Les Paul and the Stratocaster, and then we've created these super strats, or the PRS guitar, which is a Les Paul Stratocaster. And there's many guitars in that vein where we synthesize these two ideas. Hegel talks about that politically speaking, about the thesis generating its own antithesis and making the synthesis. And that new synthesis becomes the new the new thesis, to which will generate its own antithesis. But there is a forward momentum with that, which you and I both agree upon, that we're moving forward with these things.
Yep.
Now, the thing is, each one of those theses or establishments can be very exciting in the early days because there's all this tangential exploration happening. But eventually we refine it and we sort of funnel and get closer and closer to an agreed upon narrative between this tension of the conservative and liberal function, between the futurists and the golden years. And eventually, through a period of refinement and through iconization, right? Creating a hero and defining, we end up all agreeing upon this is what that is. And then we move into a period of reenacting the hero. And that's when the blues societies and the jazz societies, and believe it or not, we've got rock universities at this point in time. That's the stage where we are.
Yeah.
And so, I see each one of these things as creating a movement, but they all have an arc. And that arc, you can look at the law of diffusion of innovation, acceptance curves, and where they are. And the fact is, historically, we can see that each one of those really comes to much of a close. And what remains are those who want to reenact it. And that's a medieval fair. That's cosplay. That's a, when I was in Lisbon a couple of years ago and I heard this roaring sound, I said, that can't be. And I turned around, and coming down the road are 20 Portuguese guys with leather vests and aviators on, reenacting Easy Rider. Basically, they were all on Harley Davidsons. That is not Portuguese culture. That's a club. That's a reenactment. That's a medieval fair. On wheels. And so it's these movements that sort of continue to go through that I first sort of began to think about, just simply trying to organize in a curatorial sense. Why is this selling? Why is this selling? What need is it filling? So that I could then understand and speak to the need. And so I'm not talking a great deal about musical movements, but those movements also come to a close. And the way they come to a close is basically, like any new thesis, we explore it and we explore it and we explore it until there's kind of nothing left to say anymore. It's been really well researched, it's been really well explored. And every musical style and every guitar design, the genres of punk rock or disco or acid jazz, or whatever it happens to be, there's a certain point in time where people start to say, it all sounds the same. There's no new music. And what they're really saying is, it's all been said. There's nothing more to say. And then someone has a new idea and we all go, oh, rock and roll, hip hop. And we go explore the new idea.
This is new.
The body of work remains. And that body of work remains with a fashion culture, with an instrumental culture, with a hymnal, the books that are in it. And then when you experience those instruments, that culture, you go to a show or watch a movie, you compare it to the hymnal. and you
Yeah.
say, is this legitimate or not? And that's kind of a, a quick way to sort of tie in movements and
Yeah.
observations that came from a guitar that brought me and exposed me to people like Hegel,
Yeah.
and why I get invited to AI think tanks.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with me knowing really almost anything about AI, but my proclivity for observations and being able to overlay concepts and take them from one discipline to the other.
Yeah. Wow. When's the book coming out? Wow. I would, yeah, I would love to hear you or read you talking about. I mean, because the guitar obviously is what you have focused on
Yeah.
the most. To talk about the guitar and the evolutions of it in that context, I'd buy that book in a second.
Well, I've had the title for a long time,
Oh
and
yeah.
I do a series of talks in
Hmm.
in universities, guitar making schools. I've been at the Venice Biennale of Architecture, different places where I tell the story of the unwritten future of guitar and why nobody plays their daddy's guitar,
Hmm.
and it's all about those things I just sort of told you about, where I explore more. But I knew that we were counting down on how much time we could still talk, so I tried to give it to you in the quick Coles notes.
Yeah. Oh, that was fascinating. Glad I asked.
Yeah, great. Well, Galen, I hope this is not our last conversation. I hope
Yeah,
that
definitely.
yeah, that we can converse again. Thank you so much for being on Life with Strings Attached. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed being on the panel discussion with you. I think that was, what was that? It was artificial intelligence, neurodata, and human-centric design, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
It was a very long title.
yeah,
And there was a bunch of fascinating people on that
yeah.
panel. And
That was a great panel. I really enjoyed that.
yeah, and that should be out sometime in the next few weeks on NAMM's website. It was recorded. I
Oh,
did ask Paul if it was released before we recorded this, so I could tell people to go here to watch it. But so far, we don't have the date, folks. But subscribe to Jamie Gale Music, and the date will be released eventually. If they want to know more about your work, Galen, where should they go to check it out?
psyml.co will will give you a taste and yeah, just check the check Google Scholar every now and again because I'm starting to publish in peer-reviewed journals again. So
Okay, can we sign up somewhere that we get alerted when you've released one of those papers?
you can always, like, Google Scholar is
Hmm.
great. You can set an alert to
Oh,
when
okay, great.
that'll work.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Your work is fascinating. I'm super curious to know what the long-term results are of you having direct wiring into
Yeah.
into your brain and where we get with all that. And I hope that one day I'll hear your musical creations
Oh, you will.
when you win that fight. Yeah. All right, Galen. Let's say goodbye for now.
Great
Wow.
talking.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for watching and listening. You can find more episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. And a special thanks to those who support us on Patreon. It's your support that enables us to do this work.